Here in Brooklyn, there's a great coffee shop and wine bar called Miss Barb's. At night, they have musical performances, DJs, and I was asked to make them a platform stage. It needed to be modular, so it could be broken down and stored when not in use. So let me show you how I built the stage for Miss Barb's. Like most projects, this one began with a trip to the lumber yard. I decided to make this entire project out of 3/4 shop-grade maple plywood. It was an affordable option, but still strong enough to build a platform stage that people are going to be standing on, sitting on. I took it back to the shop and began ripping 6-inch strips, which, when glued together, will make the top. Now, this was the last project I had a chance to build at my old wood shop before it unfortunately burned down in a fire. And if you're curious, I recall that story in my previous video. For the base, I knew I'd be using dados to create the platform. So I started by building a jig. This is something that I saw from a Next Level Carpentry video. I'll link to that in the description. I think this is the quickest, easiest way to make housing dados for 3/4 inch material. I determined the spacing by first adding the total width of each piece of plywood being used in the base, subtracting that from the total length of the sides, and then dividing it by the number of divisions I needed. And this gave me the exact placement of each horizontal piece of the platform. Then it was simply a matter of lining up the jig on the pencil lines and carving out the dados. Once the dados were carved out of each side piece, I could flip them front to front and measure the exact width of the inside of the dado, and this told me what length each horizontal piece needed to be. And here I'm doing a dry fit just to make sure that I got the length correct. By scribing a line down the side, I knew exactly where to drive screws to support each beam. Now I wanted to add some additional internal support in the form of some small connector beams. I was able to quickly lay out some dados on those horizontal support pieces, which will eventually house these additional support brackets. After I marked the supporting bracket locations, I disassembled the platform and then carved out the dados. Finally, I glued and screwed the whole thing back together. Now I was able to carve out the remaining dados with the platform just sitting on its side. Once those were cut out, I simply marked with a pencil how long I wanted the support bracket to be, took it to the miter saw, and then glued and screwed it in place. Now, one thing I didn't show here was that for each one of these, I snuck up on the cut gradually, which to get a perfect fit is pretty essential. Sneaking up on the cut tends to be more accurate than if you just relied on your tape measure. And don't forget to sweep up as you go. I don't know why people don't show this more often. After all, this is part of woodworking too. Off camera, I assembled the second platform. Using this spade bit, I drill a hole between the two, and then, to avoid blowout, I finished the hole on the opposite side. And then I just used a threaded bolt and a wing nut to keep the two together. Now I'm taking those 6-inch slats from before and starting to lay out the pattern on the top. The top will have these slats arranged in a chevron pattern, which you'll see more later in the video. Here I'm laying out each piece in a kind of dry run to make sure that they align perfectly, and so I could know exactly how much to trim off the back because I've laid it out on the platform itself. Now, it's really satisfying to see the chevron pattern emerge. A simple design idea like this on something this large has a big impact. I also accumulated quite a few triangles in the process. I'm using a biscuit joiner to align each piece. The biscuits are not there for strength, but more for alignment. When you're gluing up these large panels, it's easy for them to go out of alignment. The biscuits are just that extra helping hand to align them for the clamps. Now the top of the platform is so large, I really have to assemble it piece by piece. As the panel got larger, I decided to use pocket screws as clamps, and I decided to just leave them there to add extra strength to the joint. Now once the platforms were finally glued together, I can get that final measurement for the tops. Then I use my track saw to trim off the excess. This is a funny last step. This one little triangle is all that was left. It's so small I couldn't even figure out how to clamp it, and honestly I don't think I even need to. The glue was enough to keep the piece in place while it dried. One of those charming details that will make people go, what happened there? Now along the front and the sides, I'm attaching a 1-inch piece of molding, both to protect the edge and also gives a hard stop on the edges for positioning on the platform. Then I added a round over to complete the look, but also because it needs to be carried downstairs, this creates a generous and comfortable handhold. Now the miters didn't come together perfectly on the molding, so I'm using the old trusty glue and sandpaper trick, and I think it actually works pretty well. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than before. This thing is going to be stored downstairs in a basement, so it needed to be strong, but also as light as possible. So what I decided to do was create some relief cuts on the inside, cutting away material that wasn't necessary for strength and was just adding weight. Now again, because this thing's going to get carried a lot, I wanted to protect people's hands, so I'm doing a round over across the entire piece wherever anyone could potentially be holding it as it's being taken downstairs. Now before I add the paint, the last step is to fill in any holes. So I'm using MH Ready Patch here, which is a new filler that I'm trying out based on a recommendation, to fill in the screw holes and any other cracks or gaps. Then I do 2 coats of primer, and before I paint, I decide to do a dry run, where I use pocket screws to attach one of the tops. This makes the top completely removable, but also very firmly attached to the base, and by doing that, adds a lot of strength. Now here's my first turnover, and look at that. If you can do-si-do on top of a stage platform, then you did good. I'm using a simple Rust-Oleum black acrylic paint for the sides. I'll do 3 coats of this, sanding between each coat. I'm not sure why I decided to do all of this with a paintbrush when rollers exist, but you live and you learn. Now for the top, the client decided on this particular shade of Osmo called Oak Antique. The first coat goes on pretty heavy, and what I'll do is come back and wipe off the excess with 3 successive rags. You can already see on the second coat how the color becomes richer and more fleshed out. I finish off with a clear coat of Osmo in satin finish. This is the final protective layer. This is a floor finish, so once it fully cures, it will be very durable for many, many years to come. It took me a long time to do this project, partly because I changed the design multiple times and also realized that there were simpler ways to do things, but I think all the effort was worth it. It was really satisfying to finally take it to Miss Barb's and see it put together for real. One of the things we talked about was leaving the stage up all the time, and we found that this actually worked really well with a couple of chairs. I'm so grateful to Miss Barb's, to Brandon and Shay. Never having built a platform stage, I feel really grateful that I got the opportunity. I learned a lot, and also I'm just very proud to see it being used, both during the day and at night. Thanks for watching, everybody, and if you're ever in Brooklyn, come check out the stage and get a coffee, and I'll see you guys next time.